Hey, want a cookie? Oh, I know you just ate, so you're craving something a little sweet. Besides, one cookie isn't gonna kill you. How about half? Just a bite? Bite it. Bite it. Bite it.
Food noise isn't fair, but Mochi Health is. Your affordable GLP-1 source that puts you on a path to successful weight loss by quieting food noise.
Bite it.
Shh. Learn more at joinmochi.com. Mochi members have access to licensed physicians and nutritionists. Results may vary.
You know that thing where you get an amazing pair of shoes at a really great price and want to tell everyone about it? Yeah, so do we. Here at Designer Shoe Warehouse, we'll give you something to brag about. Like the latest styles from brands you love, or the trends everyone's obsessing over, or shoes that make you feel like, well, you. So go ahead, show off a little. Find shoes that get you at prices that get your budget. Head to your DSW store or DSW.com today. DSW, let us surprise you.
Voices for Justice is a podcast that uses adult language and discusses sensitive and potentially triggering topics, including violence, abuse, and murder. This podcast may not be appropriate for younger audiences. All parties are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Some names have been changed or omitted per their request or for safety purposes. Listener discretion is advised. My name is Sarah Turney, and this is Voices for Justice. This week's episode is a follow-up to the Molly Bish case. My original plan was to release my full interview with Molly's sister, Heather. You're still going to hear that interview, but I have to acknowledge a huge recent development in the case. I was actually in my hotel room in Austin at CrimeCon on Thursday, the same day that the Molly Bish episode aired, when I got a message from Heather that made my jaw drop. If you haven't heard, the Massachusetts State Police announced that they have a new person of interest in the case, Frank P. Sumner Sr. The police say that they looked into Sumner early on in the investigation, but after some new tips came in, they've been working for months to try to verify a connection to Molly. Apparently, Frank was living in the area when Molly went missing, and he has an extensive police record, including charges for aggravated rape and kidnapping. According to People magazine, District Attorney Joseph Early has stated that he considers Sumner to be an official suspect at this point. But he admits that this doesn't mean that he's the perpetrator, and they haven't ruled anyone out. Unfortunately, Frank Sumner died in 2016, but according to the Boston Globe, he did provide a DNA sample about 4 years after Molly was murdered. I really hope that if Sumner is the person who killed Molly, that they're able to confirm that through DNA. I can't imagine what Heather and her family are going through right now. The hope of a new person of interest is amazing, but I have to imagine knowing that he's no longer alive to go through the justice system has to be really hard. I didn't want to poke and prod Heather about her feelings on this one. I just offered my support and an ear if she wanted to talk. But she did tell CBS News in Boston, quote, "I don't know if we'll ever know exactly what happened to Molly, but if we know the person who did it, that's good enough for me." End quote. They are keeping a lot of information close to the vest right now as they continue to investigate the possibility that he could be involved with Molly's disappearance and eventual murder. This is still a very new development, so I'm really hesitant to say much more on the subject. But they are continuing to ask the public to come forward with any information, so if you do have information about Molly or Sumner or any connection there, please call the tip line at 508-453-7575. This development kind of rolls into my conversation with Heather that I want to play for you today. If you're a member of my Patreon, you know that I rarely ask family members to give me a breakdown of the series events of their loved one's murder or disappearance in my interviews. I try my best to come to the table with as much knowledge as possible about the case so that I don't have to make them relive every detail of what is most likely one of the worst days of their lives. I feel like that's my responsibility as a podcaster. I do the research, and then I go to them with clarifying questions and to learn more about who the victim was as a person. I then weave their statements into the story. It's just my preferred style. I also don't really put a time limit on my interviews, and I'm happy to go out of chronological order to allow them to speak their piece. Essentially, I do have a set of questions, but I really let them take the lead when they want to. Honestly, I feel like it makes for a more natural and honest conversation. But this means that most of my interviews never get shared in full because they just don't make a lot of sense without the episode attached, and some are upwards of 3 hours long. My interview with Heather was different. It's still definitely fragmented in that it doesn't tell Molly's complete story, but we got off track in the best kind of way. While talking about Molly, we began talking about true crime in general, specifically ethics around true crime, some of our positive experiences and some of the negative. Ethics in true crime is something that I am extremely passionate about because of what I've gone through. I speak about it pretty much every day in my normal life. I've also begun speaking about it at events like True Crime Podcast Festival and CrimeCon, as well as in some video projects related to specific cases and shows. I have been extremely hesitant to bring this topic to the podcast as a standalone episode. I find that I'm constantly trying to find the balance between making sure that the entire world knows exactly how grateful I am for everything this community has done and continues to do for me, and discussing that this is a space where everyone should be striving to continue to learn and grow. I have been accused of being a social justice warrior. To that, I say I absolutely am, but not in the derogatory way that I believe the statement was posed. This is true crime. These are real stories. In my humble opinion, this is an area where people should be constantly asking themselves, how do we make this a better space for victims and their families? I didn't get into true crime to talk about these cases, cash a check, and never think about them again. I got into true crime to help my sister. And once I experienced the at times flat out horrendous treatment of family members and victims in this space, I knew I wanted to help. I feel that I have experienced the best and the worst that this community has to offer. When I spoke with Heather, who has been in this space about 20 years longer than I have, I knew I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only person who has experienced these extreme highs and extreme lows. I wasn't the only family member that has been outright used, abused, and thrown away by someone who acted like a friend or advocate. I'm not the only person who has been traumatized by the media, the police, and the justice system. But above all, I'm not the only person who has experienced all of that and said, how do I make this space better? So that's why I wanted to share my interview with Heather Bish. What started as a normal interview asking questions about Molly developed into a deeper conversation about what it's really like for us going through this process. I realize that this episode may not be for everybody. And again, I feel compelled to make sure you understand that both Heather and I, and probably most families of victims, are extremely grateful for this industry. But I think it's important for consumers of true crime to understand what it's really like behind the content you consume. Kind of like how I feel we should know how our food, clothing, beauty products, etc. are made. So if you are interested in learning more, thank you for being here. And if you aren't, I totally understand. Not everyone wants to know how the bacon gets to their plate, and I get it. I'm not the moral compass of true crime. I'm not here to preach at you or scrutinize the true crime content you enjoy. For me, whatever gets you to caring about the victim, whether that's a podcast where the hosts drink and exchange banter, or it's a sensational TV show, I don't really care. For me, it's about intentions. If you care about the victim and want to help, that's the best case scenario in my mind. But if you are interested in getting a behind-the-scenes look into this industry and, of course, learning even more about Molly Bish, this is the episode for you. So with all of that being said, here is my interview with Heather Bish. The first thing I wanted to ask you was just about the family dynamic. Can you tell me a little bit about, what it was like growing up with Molly? What was it like in your household? I know that you were a little bit older and removed from the house, but I would just love to learn a little bit more.
Sure. We actually moved here from Michigan when I was 3 years old. My mom was from Michigan and met my dad in college. And after they had me, there was a murder in their neighborhood, and they thought maybe we should move back to where my dad was from. It's a small town. It's classic kind of case of thinking it's a little bit safer than, the Detroit area. So we moved to Massachusetts when I was 3, and my brother came along shortly thereafter. And Molly came around about 6 years later. She's 6 years younger than me. She was born actually at home in our house. My parents are kind of these sort of old hippies, and it was kind of when I was 6. It was really exciting. But then, your mom goes into labor, it becomes a little scary. But when Molly was born, it was like she was my baby. I had a brother for so long, and all he wanted to do was play with trucks and get in the dirt, and I was really sick of that. So I was so excited to have Molly. I wanted her to be just like me, and I imagined, having a best friend. And as we grew up, we we had those typical, sister fights over clothes. And, she wanted us, my friends, when I was an adolescent, to go play Barbies with her. And she was always, trying to get in and play with us. And, we had those typical fights. But Molly, when she was getting older into her teenage years and I was in college, we became closer. You kind of grow into that relationship as you get older, and you do become more like best friends. And so Molly came to visit me at college a few times. I didn't really go away that far. I was about an hour away, and she would stay some weekends with me. And we remained close, even though I was in college for 4 years before she disappeared. Um, I had moved back that year home and was unexpectedly, surprisingly pregnant. So my daughter was born 11 months before Molly disappeared, and Molly was her godmother. And um, we actually inherited our grandmother's house, which is right down the street from my parents' home. So it was really convenient when you're a young mother to live that close to your family. And Molly would come down and feed Michaela and play with her. And in fact, that morning that she disappeared, she stopped in because we had had a little stomach bug and hadn't seen her for a couple of days, and she had missed Michaela. And so she had come by that morning right before she left. And I'm always so grateful for that because I had a chance to hug her and she had a chance to, spend a little more time with Michaela. So that those moments were, it's those tiny moments you don't realize are so important to you, hindsight. And so, we kind of grew up in a small family. It was just my brother and my sister and my parents. My grandmother lived down the street. We had an uncle that lived nearby, but it was really just us. So our holidays were quite small, and we were very close. We went to each other's soccer games and horseback riding shows. And um, we were just, of course, this is before Facebook and cell phones, so you didn't have as much distractions. Um, but yeah, we were a very close family. And I guess that's why when Molly went missing and the police didn't look for her, and they later said, oh, she ran away or she's left her job, we knew that wasn't what Molly would do. We knew her character. We knew, I mean, I knew that my sister wouldn't walk around without her shoes on. So right there, I was totally freaked out when I saw her shoes at the pond that day. So I guess that's sort of how we grew up. My parents, again, they were kind of these old hippies, and they believed in, even if you just had a little something extra, you should help another person. And my mom was a teacher. My dad was a probation officer. We were really middle class. We lived in a little ranch house. We didn't have much extra, but my mom would buy extra mittens and hats, and we would give them to the kids who didn't have any. And so we grew up sort of learning that's how you operate in life is you take care of each other. And I think that's really contributed to how we've continued Molly's legacy after she's been gone.
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely one of the questions on my list. And since you brought it up, I would love to talk more about that. I mean, I was just astounded to see all of the efforts you guys have made to really make change. I mean, from police trainings to trying to, change the way that, the entire system works. I'm so, like I said, you're my hero. Like your whole family is really just banded together when so many families fall apart. So, again, I would love to learn more about all of these initiatives and, what makes you do this. I love the fact that you're saying that they're like old hippies or whatever, and that's what did it. But it also seems like, like Molly shines through everything you guys do. And I just love it and would love to learn more.
Oh, sure. And, that is part of why I was so happy that you invited me to do this today because your efforts, I feel, we've really traveled that same road together. And I think, this strength comes out of people. And I don't think that you or I are really unique to anyone else, but you just find this strength and this sort of bear inside you. And, I was a shy child growing up. I didn't expect to be, um, having press conferences or speaking publicly and, going to hearings on bills. But that's sort of what developed, and that's the strength. And I think that strength comes from love. And I think when you lose people that you love, that love doesn't go away. Love is kind of an action, not really a place to arrive at. And I think if you use that love to continue the work or the life or the intentions of the person that you lost, you can still kind of have that person. I know for us, and it's a little different because Molly was missing and now it's an unsolved case, but I often hear families who've lost loved ones say that no one talks about their loved one to them, and they want to talk about that person. And we're really lucky that we have a platform to talk about that person. And um, when Molly disappeared, we didn't really know that this kind of thing would happen. We lived in a small town. We didn't lock our doors. We thought we knew all our neighbors. We thought we were all friends. And the moment that Molly was gone, we started looking around us and thinking, oh, maybe that guy over there doesn't look so friendly, or maybe we don't know our neighbors as well, and maybe Molly's friends aren't really her friends. We looked at everybody, we questioned everybody, and that's a scary place to arrive at because your whole world rocks, and I don't think you ever get the perspective back again that you're safe in any capacity. And from that moment, my parents, it really just started with the police asking us for a good head and shoulders picture of Molly, and we didn't have it. My parents didn't even know where the camera was by that point. So we felt like when we learned that 1 in 6 children is recovered with a good photo, that sort of became our way to educate and help others. We didn't know the statistics. We didn't know that how many sex offenders lived in our area. We just didn't know any of those things, and knowing that sort of arms you with um, you know sort of the impetus to have to do something. If you know, then you can't unknow something, and so you have to sort of move forward. And we didn't really have control of the investigation. I mean, from the beginning, they didn't look for Molly for 3 hours. The fire department thought she drowned. They blamed her running away. They blamed the boyfriend. They spent so much time chasing the wrong things that we didn't have any control of that. And the only thing we could control is how we could help others. And it just started with that. We thought other families needed to know if there was a guy out there stealing kids, then everybody needed to know how to protect their children. And it sort of started with that concept, and grew because then we started learning about the criminal justice system. And my mom and I are both teachers, so we come from a system that works together. We have the autism specialist and the gym teacher and the third grade teacher all in a room together coming up with plans for children. So we're used to working together. And the criminal justice system doesn't exactly work that way. And there's a lot of egos, there's a lot of not playing in the sandbox together. And so we tried to not get angry about that, but to try to support change in those dynamics. So, my father would sponsor law enforcement officers to go down to the National Center for training because law enforcement isn't really trained in missing persons cases. In fact, municipal police today are still not trained in how to respond to a missing child. So it's kind of scary. I mean, that's in Massachusetts. It's kind of scary, and it's been 20 years, and so we don't know. It's really up to the level of the department on what they know about how to react to a missing child. And I think some towns in Massachusetts do a good job, and others could certainly use the improvement. But it really started out with how can we support improvement, because there wasn't much that we could do to change their minds or to tell them what to do. And so it kind of started with how can we help them get smarter. It's kind of like don't work harder, work smarter kind of concept. And so it started with trainings and advocacy, and then it developed into legislation. And my parents helped bring the Amber Alert program to Massachusetts. They were there when the Adam Walsh Act was signed by President Bush. They worked on numerous initiatives, and it was different for John and I. I mean, I was 23 when my sister disappeared, and John was 19. we were just developing like who we were and what we stood for and what our you know what our life was going to be. So we didn't really get that 20s, that you kind of have that self discovery, and we kind of just followed our parents' lead, and we would have these what we would call fragile Fridays. And no matter where we were, we'd meet at this little diner in the next town, and we'd have fried fish or whatever. And they had these old fashioned candy machines, and my daughter would beg for candies. And sometimes we wouldn't talk about anything, and other times we would have so much to discuss. And there most of the times we weren't in the same place. We were often on our own journey of grief and making sense of this, but we always came together. And I think that's sort of what kind of kept our family together in some ways. I mean, it's certain that John and I have felt some abandonment issues when our parents were swept away from losing Molly. And there's certainly some family pain and suffering that has happened, but we have maintained being able to stay together. And even now my parents come down and visit me. I moved about 2 hours away from home, and they come out about once a month. And I get back to see my brother and his children every so often. But it started with them showing us what to do. And unfortunately, my father had a stroke in 2007, and it was really a bad stroke. And he lost his periphery vision and his short-term memory, and he has what you call left side neglect. And um, but the amazing thing from that was that my dad, before the stroke, had carried this weight of having lost Molly. He was the father, he was a probation officer. He felt the weight of that, really strongly. And after the stroke, it sort of vanished. I mean, he knew Molly disappeared. He was sad about it, but he just wants to be with his family. He's just happy to sit by the window having a coffee, looking at the birds, and being together. It almost released him from that burden and allowed him to still live with us, so we could still experience having a dad and a grandfather. But it did change my life, and I sort of inherited the investigation and the foundation and the political work. My mom was really busy working, taking care of my dad, and she was working. And so it sort of fell to my shoulders. And I was, just like you in the beginning, very committed to screaming from every mountain and looking under every rock and trying to find my sister. I also put up billboards, and I took out newspaper ads in almost every newspaper in Massachusetts. I've put flyers in every single town in Massachusetts. I've worked with different private investigators. I've held tip campaigns. Um, I've tried everything that I could possibly think of to sort of shake that tree and get that missing piece of information. Our investigation is challenging because the crime scene wasn't kept safe. It was sort of trampled on by the people at the beach and the parks commissioner. So we have some challenges in our investigation that I've been trying to overcome with various techniques. And I'm still working on it. I'm looking for different ways now. And again, I try to keep that perspective of not becoming angry because the systems in place are kind of messed up. For example, our data systems in Massachusetts, there's probably like three or four different kinds. So it's not like Law and Order, where they have the big board and they've got all these people connected with string, and an investigator can just go in there and pick up. It's like there's like a paper file, and then there's this data system from the early 2000s or late 2000s, and there's another one. There's like three or four different data systems. So if someone wants to go in and find an early character, um, they're looking through four or five different data systems. It's taken half the day. This is an unresolved case for 20 years. They don't have that kind of time. So the time does work against us, and the system does, because, it's not totally functional. I keep saying, what about interns? Can't you get interns to input this information into one system? But apparently I'm not in charge of the world, I guess. So, you know, that makes things more challenging. And then you have new investigators. We've lost two assistant district attorneys to death. We've had a number of people die in Molly's case, and others move on to other positions. So, that leaves the family with the essential knowledge and the history of the case. I've been really, really fortunate with support from the media in our case. So we've got a couple investigative reporters in Massachusetts that have literally been with me for 20 years and sort of support me in sharing information, sharing Molly's story, sort of shaking the police's tree. But recently, I had met with my investigators about 2 years ago, and they had mentioned familial DNA analysis, and I'm a special ed teacher, not a scientist, or I literally cross my fingers when I do science experiments. But I looked into this, and I saw that there were so many other states, and there was really good results on this, and it was really, for me, it was just widening the net. So we have a CODIS system that has all our people who commit felonies, and so usually when you get an unidentified DNA sample, you put that into CODIS and you get a hit. Great. If not, they'll send that profile back to the law enforcement in some states. And what I hope will happen here in Massachusetts is that then the investigators can propose to do a familial searching. And what that would do is they take that unidentified DNA and they cast the net wider, and they look at anybody in CODIS that might be related to that profile. So they might get like a 76 or 37%, match, and that doesn't really give you the answer. Then you have to actually do the, investigative work and say, okay, this person was in, let's say, Warren, Massachusetts, and they were working and they were doing construction, so they, had access to the victim. So, it's really just a lead, but it kind of widens the net in the amount of people that it could be. And interestingly enough, 50% of the people in CODIS have a family member in CODIS as well, which may speak to a bigger society issue. But in terms of doing a familial search, that kind of lends itself to being more successful. So I've been working on that here in Massachusetts, and we're putting it forward as a bill to our legislature, because here in Massachusetts we're sticklers for our standards and process and guidelines, and so our state lab really wanted this put in as a law instead of a policy change. So this is unique to any other state in the country. I think it's a harder effort, and I've been spending a lot of my free time speaking to legislators and talking to district attorneys and really trying to explain the value of this tool for law enforcement, but also for families. I mean, when you get a case that's 20 years old, you've kind of losing hope by this point. And there's plenty of families that don't have the voice, that don't have the privilege, or the ability to fight like we do. And I think about those cases, and it's almost like my mom has always called it the club that no one wants to belong to. And I think if we had success with any of those people in that club, I would call it a win for me too. It's just so important for family members to have resolution.
This episode of Voices for Justice is sponsored by Chewy. If you have pets, you probably know about Chewy, and you also know that when they say that they have everything you need to keep your pet happy and healthy, they're not messing around. To keep them happy, Chewy has over 100,000 products from all the brands my pets love at prices I love. To keep them healthy, Chewy offers pet prescriptions, pet insurance, telehealth vet visits, and they're even rolling out vet clinics across the country. I've been shopping with them for a very long time. And in addition to the auto-ship feature that gets the dog's food to them every single month, I also love to experiment with different treats. But I'm a bit picky. For me, it has to be high quality with simple ingredients. I recently picked up treats from Shepherd Boy Farms that are 100% just chicken breast. Popcorn and Heber are already obsessed. Chewy has everything you need to keep your pet happy and healthy. And right now, you can save $20 on your first order and get free shipping by going to chewpanions.chewy.com/Sarah E. Turney. That's chewpanions.chewy.com/Sarah E. Turney to save $20 on your first order with free shipping. chewpanions.chewy.com/Sarah E. Turney. Minimum purchase required. New customers only. Terms and conditions apply. See site for complete details. This episode of Voices for Justice is brought to you by Quince. I've been trying to be more intentional about what I wear each day. I'm leaning into pieces that feel effortless, comfortable, and still put together, and Quince has been my go-to. The fabrics feel elevated, the fits are flattering, and everything just works without overthinking it. They use premium materials like 100% European linen, organic cotton, and ultra-soft denim. And the best part? Everything is priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. They work directly with ethical factories and cut out the middlemen, so you're paying for quality and craftsmanship, not brand markup. I recently just ordered their tiered linen dress, of course in black. I wanted to pair it with one of my favorite pairs of brown wedges. The problem was, I didn't have a brown purse. So I got that from Quince too. It's one of my favorite outfits. It's easy, effortless, and feels amazing, especially as we're getting a little bit warmer here in Phoenix. Refresh your everyday with luxury you'll actually use. Head to quince.com/justice for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/justice for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/justice. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I couldn't agree more. I mean, gosh, you've done so much. I'm just honestly astounded. And what I think is so smart about what you're doing is everything is so like bite-sized and obtainable. It's not as if you're going in there and you want to change everything about the system. You're putting really practical ways in place to make things better and to even make law enforcement's job a little bit easier. You know, like I saw one of the initiatives was like just 2 hours of training for police for missing kids, and I was like, that is so obtainable.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know those efforts are, we know how hard law enforcement works, and just like any other job in the world, there's good cops and bad cops. And and when Molly was when we were doing the recovery for Molly, there were state police detectives and local police and search and rescue, but there was also um, detectives or law enforcement from the state police academy that were there. And these people were digging through thick underbrush, walking up hills in the middle of June in Massachusetts. So it's like, 90 degrees and humid, and there's bears around here. And they were so desperate to help us. And I still remember their faces to this day, and I'll never forget that. I know, the intent of the district attorneys and law enforcement is to help people and to solve crimes. And most of them, I think that's what it is. And we want to support that and not concentrate on the people that are not doing their job. Because hopefully they'll come to an end of that, in their own way.
Yeah, and that's fair. I mean, I took the exact opposite approach by just calling out everyone who wasn't doing their job, but I think your approach is much it's better.
Well,
I feel like I didn't have another option.
I can't say
Um
that I haven't done that. You might YouTube one victim event that happened a few years ago. But I did. We had a colonel of the state police that we went to. We had a victim event at a local college, and there was a number of victims there besides us, people who had been raped, who've been assaulted by priests, and just a number of victims. And it was an event in April, recognizing Victim Awareness Month. And the colonel of the state police at the time and I had a long history. He had been an initial investigator on Molly's case, and he came to this event, and he was the first to speak. And he was really just talking about the history of the state police, and really, instead of really talking about victims, and we had worked with him for so long, we were sitting there like, what is he talking about? And then, as the victims were about to go up to speak, and fortunately or unfortunately, I happened to be the first one. he walked out with all his detectives. So like half the audience left this event and they hadn't even listened to the victims yet. So I kind of said, "What are you doing? What are you doing, dude?"
Yeah, my jaw just dropped. Yeah, that's I mean, I can believe that is all I can say. Unfortunately. I do feel like there is this struggle between police and families, and you mentioned it, like, we've seen you officers come and go, and we've been here for 20 years. And I feel like sometimes the police don't understand that, and they just think, well, I'm the detective, I'm the officer, whatever it might be. And we kind of get like pushed to the wayside as if we haven't been here the whole time, as if we don't know every single detail. We don't know who, our loved ones' best friends were and their hobbies. And I think it's really unfortunate that sometimes law enforcement doesn't feel like they can work in conjunction with the family like that, especially when it's like your family, where it seems like, there's never really been any suspicion that you could have been involved. It doesn't seem to be a factor in this case. Like, why not work with the family if they know more about it than you?
I agree. As much as I support law enforcement, I recognize all the good detectives and law enforcement. It has been an absolute struggle for myself and my family. In actuality, I almost think the relationship with the police has or is more traumatizing than the event that actually happened to my sister, because you are trusting someone because they're law enforcement. You grow up, most of us grow up believing law enforcement is there to protect us, and when they don't, and then when they sort of start gaslighting you and disrespecting your thoughts or ideas, or just this toxicity, the way that they treat victims. I'm constantly talking to myself and reminding myself that I have to remain calm, because they will use my emotional reaction and make me out to be a crazy person, or psychologically unstable, or whatever it is to serve their purpose so that they can continue to do what they're doing. And privately, I'm calling them out all the time, like, what about this? What about that? My detective currently doesn't know anything about the beginning of my sister's case and cannot answer any questions for me. It's almost embarrassing for him, I would think, and incredibly frustrating for me. And I don't believe he will solve this case. I think it's going to be someone that's doing a podcast, someone that comes forward with information, or hopefully science. But I don't think it's going to be detective work, because it's been lazy. It's been not cohesive. There was a time, we had a person of interest named Rodney Stanger in Florida, and I kept asking. I had found out that he was in jail, and he had lived in a trailer, and that nobody had ever searched the trailer. And I was like, I mean, we had this guy for over a year in our sort of periphery, and Fox News ended up going down to this trailer and looking around, and like maybe an hour or two after Fox News got there, the state police, had shuffled down there. But they had a picture of this guy from April of 2000, right before Molly disappeared, a fishing license that looked exactly like the sketch. None of this stuff could hold up in court, because the time had gone by so much and the evidence could have been tampered with. Anyone could have went into that trailer. But the fact that they had missed that ball again, and that was like 10 years after Molly disappeared, was incredibly disheartening. But I've watched them miss so many balls. And I guess that's the choice that victims have to make. You either go down that tunnel and scream, or you try to find another path, and know that what you're doing and what you're saying is a normal emotional reaction to the behavior of people that aren't actually being authentic, aren't actually being trustworthy, aren't actually being, responsible. And that is probably the hardest thing. I think I've definitely developed huge trust issues from the state police. I think that has been the hardest part of this journey, besides the actual loss of my sister, is having to deal with this incredibly toxic system.
Yeah. I mean, I identify so much with that. Everything you're saying, I'm like, we are on the same wavelength. And you made an interesting point about, when they went out to the trailer, right? That the police didn't come until the media came. And I think, when people like us are out there advocating for cases like this, people don't understand why we are so vocal sometimes or why we try to go to the media. And it's because it's like that's our biggest leverage is almost to embarrass them into taking action.
Absolutely. It's a game. It's like a chess game. And you develop these relationships with the media. They're, some of these investigative reporters are now my best friends, really. I mean, they've been there on this journey with me for 20 years, and they've seen the atrocities that the detectives have done. They came back from Florida, they were doing some DNA testing. And so for about 6 weeks, they were telling myself and an investigative reporter, any day now that DNA is going to be back any day now. So we're calling every week, checking on it. About 6 weeks later, they said to me suddenly, Heather, we're not going to talk to you about DNA anymore. And I'm like, what do you mean? I've been calling you every week. We're not going to talk to you about it anymore. So I was pissed off. I'm like, what? Again, you're like gaslighting me. Something got messed up, and you're acting like it's my fault, and I don't get the privilege of knowing what is going on with my sister's investigation. So there was some, misstep with delivering the DNA to the lab, and I think they ended up sending it to Texas. So I called down to Texas just to make sure that the DNA was there. Really, seriously, that's what I called them for. I knew they weren't going to tell me anything. Didn't expect that. I didn't fall off the turnip truck last week. I knew they weren't going to tell me, but I wanted to ensure I needed it so I could sleep at night. But the DNA actually made it to the freaking lab. So the lab, obviously told the detectives that I had called, and they were pissed, and they would not talk to me about DNA for probably about a year at least. But that's what it has been a game. It's like, the thing about getting your story out isn't just to raise awareness, but it's also to update the case. I think so many people think Molly's case has been solved because we've had so many different suspects, but we haven't been able to arrest anybody. And we only get so close. We have had really good suspects, and we get to this like wall, and we can't go any further. And to me, the person that did this, we're going to get past that wall, and that's who I'm looking for. And we know relationships change over time, and people feel safer, or they're not with that person anymore, or they're not loyal to that person anymore, and so they may come forward. And it just takes that one piece, to solve these cases. I just read about a case um, the other day that this piece came forward, and they were able to do the science, and bam, they got the guy. So that's what I keep hoping for, is that little piece of information. We often talk about, it could be just that you saw a white car drive by the police station at 9:55 on that day, or you saw a white car sitting at the cemetery a week before. It could be just something that seems irrelevant, but it will actually give a timestamp and fit the connections to put these pieces together. And so I think sharing our story not only empowers, you know, our loss and taking charge of the case and the narrative, but it also hopefully leads to some resolution.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that's a huge piece too, obviously, is we're doing this to get leads. Like, that is, I think, the number one reason why we go to the media. It isn't really to shame the police or cry on camera. I don't think any of us enjoy that. It's to help get leads and generate leads because, like you said, it could be the smallest piece of information. I feel like I say that all the time. Like, you never know. If you know anything, just something, just come forward.
Exactly, and you never know. This person could have a change of heart. We don't know who did this. We often think of, murders as like all tying in together, and there's only one bad guy that killed these three girls in this area over 10 or 20 years. But actually, there's probably three bad guys that killed those three girls over 10 or 20 years. The bad guys look like priests. They coach our soccer teams. They live next door to us. They deliver our mail. They don't look like monsters.
Oh, exactly. Exactly. I think everybody wants it to be like some big serial killer and it to be this big case, but you're exactly right. It's usually just a person we'd never realize.
Yeah, and I think, really, again, if you know, and can't want I want to use the word that I'm happy that we're sort of acknowledging the bias and the racism and the sexism that's happening in our world today. But I am kind of glad it's coming to the surface because I grew up in the 90s where I couldn't take the school bus to school because someone kept grabbing my boobs on the bus and they said that's what boys do. And my what were my parents going to do? My dad had to drive me to school every day, and that was normalized. And so I guess when we stop normalizing abuse and sexism and racism, then maybe we'll have less crime. And when the fourth leading cause of death for women in particular age groups is men, um, I think we're all in danger. We need to talk about that more.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I just shared something about like David Dobrik or whatever, and I was like, I don't know if you're. I'm like I love pop culture stuff. It's kind of like my guilty pleasure. I mean, of course, this is a horrific story, but this huge YouTuber David Dobrik is now there's all these videos now of just like sexual harassment is what it is. And I shared it and I was like, I was that girl where like, you snap my bra or whatever and you think it's funny. I was the cool girl. I was the it's fine girl. And it's like it was so normalized, but you're exactly right. These things lead, I mean, obviously not in every case, but these things lead to more consequences. To think that you can go up to any random woman and be able to touch her body, like what else do you think you have permission to do?
Right, exactly. And I think once we get a better understanding and processing that more as a general society, maybe we won't think that these guys are really monsters, and we'll start seeing through behavior in individuals and being more keen, and aware. Because again, I really think that my sister's case will be solved by someone that comes forward.
Yeah. No, and I mean, it does seem like a case that just needs a few more pieces to crack. I mean, I did want to ask you, I wasn't able to find anything. And of course, I know you wouldn't tell me if you couldn't, but I had to ask, are there any updates on the buried car and all of that?
No, that was a really sad situation. Again, like I had mentioned, and I don't think we touched on this, but I had mentioned that I had worked with several different private investigators over the years, and you know, I was glad and happy that people would come forward and try to help me, especially after my father had his stroke, and he was sort of leading those efforts, and again, he was at least sort of in the field of criminal justice. I'm a teacher over here. I don't even have you know the slightest idea. At least my dad, I felt like, had some. So I was really grateful when the number a few of them came forward. I would say of all of them that I've worked with, probably only one was authentic. The rest of them were looking for media attention or some sort of popularity. One was starring on Nancy Grace, and they would find these people of interest, and then they would like sort of slam the door and say, "That's it, I solved it, Heather." And I would say, "Well, we don't have an arrest, and you know this looks really good circumstantially, but we need more." And they would say, "Well, you might never get that, Heather, and you just have to settle. This is the person." And I could never do that because it wasn't 100%, and I want 100%. I don't want to blame someone for my sister's murder that didn't do it. And I mean, I'll certainly look at all these people, and it's really scary how many people fit that profile and were in the area and did do bad things. But I felt like it was irresponsible for them to sort of say that they solved Molly's murder, and they sort of open and shut the case themselves. And that's sort of how the police kind of were. I mean, for us, very early, they were very tunnel vision. We would bring forward our concerns from people that we knew that were around Molly, and they would say, "Nope, we're looking at this person, or we're doing this." Like, especially for Molly's boyfriend. I mean, that kid was like crucified in the media, and he was just a kid. I mean, 16-year-old kid, came from a troubled family, didn't have support networks in place, and had to deal with a huge crime, and in a context where his father, was selling weed out of the house. And how do you deal with that? You get the police like ready to arrest you, and they you don't have support, you don't have anyone. So it really made me sad and um, kind of scared that they would go after someone like that. And some of them still think of him in this context. But you know, the car was brought up by another private. Well, she wasn't even a private investigator. She was actually a volunteer in our foundation when I first met her. She was in college. She went on to get her doctorate in forensics or criminology or something, and then came back to our area and was like, I really want to help you. You know, now my father had the stroke and I was doing this on my own. She had this great background. She did these behavior profiles. It was really interesting. She helped me run these tip campaigns. And then she kind of went off on her own and was like really obsessed with this particular suspect or person of interest, and that led to the car in the cemetery. She had organized this search, and I actually had to be at my daughter's orientation in college, and I was like, I can't really be there. Are you sure you're going to be able to handle this? Because the media gets here, it's going to be a nightmare. Well, and we were trying to do this under the cuff to just see. I mean, what are the chances a car is going to be buried in a campground? You know, I don't really know the odds on that, but I'm thinking, you know, they're not really high. So, um, she ended up doing this whole thing, and the media came, and it became a mess. And she lied. And the person who came from the University of Connecticut to do the sonar testing disappeared, and none of us got reports on what was there. They didn't find anything, but they acted like there might be something there, but they didn't have any evidence to prove that. She later wrote a book, and in this book, she claims to have solved Molly's case, and she claims to have found Molly's clothing in the area Molly disappeared. That clothing was ruled out as not being Molly's. My family ruled it out, the police ruled it out, yet she continued to develop her own narrative, saying that that was, you know, she had done all this work. So, you know, I think again, victims' families are vulnerable to people that, you know, maybe are working out their own psychological issues or their own egos, um, and take advantage of families. Certainly, that's what these past people will do, and I'm not even going to bring up their names because I'm not even going to give them the credit. Uh, that's how meaningless they've been to me. They, you know, yeah, I can't explain the level of betrayal, I guess, that you know a family goes through initially with the loss and the of the victim, and then dealing with the police and again that sort of toxic behavior, and then being taken advantage of by people. Uh, and you know, I've known other victim families that have been taken advantage of by the media. That has not been my experience, but certainly the people who sort of mask or pretend that they're private investigators or are private investigators, they have certainly taken advantage of my family. So the car, nothing. There's nothing with that. That didn't lead to anything. That was really a waste of very much time.
Gosh, I mean, I'm so sorry. I know what it's like, you know what I mean? For someone to get so close to you and so close to the case and then just betray you. It is just the worst feeling because like you said, we're desperate. We are like the easiest type of prey for private investigators, for the media, for really anybody because we're out here screaming for help and when people come, we're like, "Oh, great. Like we're so excited. Thank you so much for helping." And we're sitting ducks and just so easy to take advantage of and I that is something I am so passionate about, so I'm so glad that you brought it up.
Yeah, it's really awful. You know, I worry about that a lot with victim families and you know my own family. And you know, I hope that this last book that was published is the end of the betrayals. I'm actually writing my own book, so I'm hoping that once my book is out there, people will actually listen to the person who's actually was there the whole time instead of all these other people.
Insurance isn't one size fits all. That's why customers have enjoyed Progressive's Name Your Price tool for years now. With the Name Your Price tool, you tell them what you want to pay, and they'll show you options that fit your budget. So whether you're picking out your first policy or just looking for something that works better for you and your family, they make it easy to see your options. Visit Progressive.com. Find a rate that works for you with the Name Your Price tool. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
It's crazy how people will take another source because like you said that there's this stigma around family members, and I think both of us are really good examples that it doesn't have to be that way. The stigma about family members just being so emotional, like too emotional to function, too emotional to be objective in the case, too emotional to be able to tell these stories. And I think it's really just kind of a BS way for the media or authors or whoever it might be to come in and say, well, I'm more qualified to tell this story. I had an incident where I was on a panel talking about ethics and true crime podcasting. And I had someone that was really close to me that had covered my sister's story extensively on this panel publicly say that my own interview with my father was less effective because I was an emotional family member. And it's just so wrong in my eyes.
It is, and it's so hurtful. I, you know, yeah, you are emotional. You're gonna be emotional when somebody's killed that you love. There are healthy emotional reactions. I'm not really sure why we are so negative about emotional reactions because I think it would be abnormal to not have a reaction to any part of this journey, whether it's in the beginning, 5 or 10, 15, 20 years later. I mean, for us, we're still living with that. It doesn't go away. I mean, I think most people who have experienced loss learn that or know that you sort of learn to live with it as opposed to like it going away or getting closure. You just sort of it's like learning to live without an arm, you kind of just adapt. And and I think that stigma and that portrayal of victims is really damaging. And I think it is to create their own narrative. I can't tell you how many shows I actually, in writing my book, I've gone back to some newspaper articles and shows, and I'm like, I cannot believe how many mistakes people have made. And they could just be slight mistakes, calling my dad a police officer instead of a probation officer, or, just getting, simple information wrong. But then there's the bigger stuff. And like I said, it leads to people thinking that Molly's case has been solved or, different narratives. And that's why it's been really important for me to get this book down. I journaled the entire time that Molly was gone, and I'm putting this together just as a victim experience, but also as sort of this is what really happened.
No, I love that though. And I think people don't understand that we're not trying to control the narrative. When these cases still need tips and they still need leads, it's really important to get the factual information out there.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's why I've loved these podcasts because a lot of different people have talked about Molly's case, and they might not have it 100% correct, but they're still sharing the general story, and that's really important to me. Like you said, it's just when it becomes another way for you to capitalize on my sister that it's just not okay. I can't imagine anyone doing that, or what kind of character that demonstrates. But it certainly says a lot more about those people than it does about the victim or their family.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the difference between a family member, being active in the true crime space versus just a journalist or just a content creator, if you will. We know, we understand, and we're here for a different reason. And I'm not saying that we're better than those other creators. It's just different.
Absolutely, absolutely. I remember when I first met a victim advocate at the court in our where our case is, and we didn't get a victim advocate right away because Molly was missing, and it wasn't until her body was recovered that we actually got a victim advocate. And I was so excited. I'm like, oh, someone's going to finally tell me where I can get resources and how I can connect with other families. And they did nothing. They didn't even have enough empathy to reach out to us. And at one point over the years, I think it was around Molly's 16th anniversary that she was missing, someone had invaded our website and it was like going to porn or something. And so I had called the district attorney because, of course, my mother could not remember the password, and she had had control of this. And so I called the district attorney and said, "Oh, geez, can you really help me with this? I don't know what to do. My mom can't get the password." He's like, "Oh, he referred me to the victim advocate." And they're like, "Oh, this is out of our hands, Heather. We don't know how to help you with this." And I'm like, "All right, well, what am I gonna do?" So it was like a week or two later that it was Molly's anniversary, and the local newspaper, was interviewing us, and one of the reporters said, "Heather, your website's going to this porn site." And I said, "Yeah, I know. I'm not really sure how to fix that. Here's my situation." And I've asked for help from the district attorney and and the victim advocate, and they told me that they didn't know what to do. And you know what? That reporter called the district attorney's office and said, "What the heck, you guys?" And it was like later that night at the vigil that the district attorney and the advocate was there, and they said, "Oh, Heather, we took care of that for you." I said, "Oh, you did, right after the reporter called you, right?" Because I had called you like 2 weeks ago. It's just, again, it's just that game playing, that bullshit. I mean, I cannot tell you how many lies to my face those guys have done.
Oh, I believe it. I believe it. And yeah, and then when you say, "Hey, you said this on this day, now you're saying this," they just look at you like you're crazy and you're emotional. And they say, "We understand how hard this can be for you." And it's like, yeah, because you're lying to me. That's what's making it hard.
Right. And if we put this into a context of an abusive relationship, if we put these investigators like into their behavior into the role of like a boyfriend or girlfriend, we would call that abuse. We would call that verbal and emotional abuse. It's projecting, it's lying, it's gaslighting, it's again manipulating your emotions. Oh, you shouldn't feel this way. I mean, it's incredibly toxic. So you wonder why victims, families don't have good relationships with police, or they suffer because of their relationship with police. It's because of being in a toxic relationship. It's because it's like being in an emotionally abusive relationship.
Oh, I totally agree. I feel exactly the same way. I feel personally victimized by the police in my sister's case.
Agreed, I do too. In fact, most of the time when I speak to them, they bring 3 or 4 guys onto the phone with me because I don't know. It seems like they need 3 guys to Heather. Like, really? And I used to say I'm just a teacher, but now I'm a doctor. And I'm like, yeah, motherfuckers, bring 3 guys.
Good. No, I get that kind of treatment now, or at least I did like before the arrest. It's like, oh no, like we got to know our stuff. Sarah's here. Let's bring in the whole crew or whatever. Cuz yeah, I mean, I feel like people like us hold them accountable, and I don't know if it's an ego thing. I want to say it's probably an ego thing, but it's like they can't handle it.
Right? It's like a narcissist thing.
Yeah, no, for sure. And sorry, I know that we've been on for an hour, so I and you want to probably enjoy some spring break. So I just have a few more questions for you.
Sure,
But of
yeah.
course, like this, honestly, this has been amazing. Like this has been therapeutic for me. I'm sorry, that's probably really selfish, but
No.
this has been this you are amazing. So I do want to, I planned to ask this early on, but the conversation just kind of naturally unfolded this way, which I love. But I wanted to talk more about Molly as a person and really bring her to life. Like when I see her pictures, to be honest, she reminds me so much of my sister. And there's photos of her where she looks like Drew Barrymore, and she seemed like a genuinely like awesome person. She seemed cool, she seemed responsible, and she seemed kind. Am I correct in believing that?
She was. Molly was funny and silly. She actually was diagnosed with ADHD early on in school because she was so active, let's say. But she would be that kid, in outfield picking the daisies and putting them in her hair. Yet she would catch that ball and then get somebody out. She was a very good athlete. She was a very strong swimmer. She played 3 sports. She helped start the soccer team, the girls soccer team at our high school. Um, she loved like Forrest Gump and laughing and being silly. She had friends, and like we had a really small school. We're from a small town. There's probably 50 to 100 kids in a graduating class, depending on the year. And so there was, you kind of got to know everybody. And Molly just was friends with everybody. She definitely had a weak spot for the underdog. When I was doing my student teaching, she was in high school, And I remember one of the aides, an instructional aide in the classroom that brought like special ed kids into like an art class, telling me that when Molly was in the class with those kids, she would always like welcome them in and make it a big deal and high five them and make them feel included as opposed to sitting in the back of the class, in sort of an exclusionary way. She loved people. She really felt, she was very sensitive. She really felt, when things were happening in the world, and understanding and sort of making sense of that. She really felt, um, you know, very emotional about things. I remember her friends, a couple of her friends had been in a car accident in the April before she disappeared, and she just had such a hard time with that. She was just so, so sad. Um, I wondered how sometimes with the world today, I wondered how Molly would have handled all this. And I don't know. We often dream about what she would be and how she would be. And um, she loved babies. Molly was funny when she was little. She really loved babies, and she would have to get the real baby clothes. So my mom would take her to a store in the next town and buy real baby clothes. She loved to sing. She loved to make jewelry. She loved her friends. She spent, so many nights in sleepover parties or having her friends over our house. Um, she loved being in love. She had a boyfriend in high school for about 3 years, and he graduated and went to college. And when that happened, she sort of was single for a while, and then she had gotten this new boyfriend who she was dating when she disappeared. But that had only been like a 3-month relationship. Um, she she loved my Michaela. She loved being an aunt. She really looked up to her brother. She wanted to be as good of a baseball player or soccer player as he was. She really was great because she was kind of, I joke about my brother and I are, he's an athlete. I'm sort of a fall up the stairs kind of person. Um, so we're kind of different. He's very good at saving money. I'm, the one that buys those shoes and eats the cake, and so Molly was a good mix of both of us, and that was really fun to see develop in her. And like I said, we were just starting that sort of grown up relationship, and I miss not having. I just imagine that having a sister would be like having a built-in best friend. Especially a little sister. You get to just tell them what to do, and they'll follow you around, and that's how it's supposed to be. Um, So I had hoped that that's, what would have happened. I imagined it would have been, and I still miss her every day.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I empathize with that. What could our relationship have been like? Type of feeling. It's something that doesn't go away. I mean, like for me, it's when there's like a major life event, you're like, man, I wish they were here.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It makes so many moments bittersweet. When my daughter turned 16, it was a very bittersweet year, and now she's going through college, and she's sort of outlived my sister, and you didn't really imagine that when Michaela was 11 months old. You just didn't imagine making it another year, and never mind 20 years. My brother didn't have kids until later on, so he has a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old now, and that it's bittersweet not having her around. He got married without her, and all of it was just hard not to have Molly at. I know Molly's friends miss her, and I know people in the community feel empathy and stuff, but it's never. You're not sitting at a Christmas dinner without that person there, and it doesn't get easier 20 years later. We still miss her as much today as we did those first days.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think people like I mean, I heard it all the time. It's kind of like, don't you want to heal and move on? And people don't get it. It's like I don't know why they apply it to cases like this where we should move on. It's like, don't you think of, your grandma or whoever could have been that passed in your life every Christmas or every whatever might have been a significant event? Like, why is it any different? Why do families like us need to move on? But if you lose someone in a non tragic way, in a more normal way, if you will, you're allowed to grieve that person forever. I don't understand the difference.
I know, and that's been kind of a weird dynamic. I don't know if you've experienced that, but, like the friends that I had, when Molly disappeared or, early in that time, I would have thought would have been with me on this the whole time, but it sort of became weird. Like they didn't want to talk about Molly, or like you said, they wanted me to get over it. Or even like now, I don't know that my friends know that I spend almost every night speaking to legislators, or writing emails to legislators about this bill, or the work that I do going, to prepare for TV shows. Like we just did the Paul is on show, and that required me sending a great deal of paperwork and pictures and talking to producers, and giving up a day of work and driving out to a location to tape. And I think they almost think like I snap my fingers and I'm just on this show and I'm getting all this attention, and it's all about me, when it's not really about me. It's about Molly, and it's about them. It's about making sure they don't ever have to feel this way. They don't ever have to experience this loss, and that their world's safer, that they can ride their bikes to the store, and I don't think that I can give up working for that. I don't think I can live in a world and sit on the couch and not work towards having it be safer.
Exactly. No, I feel the same way. And I feel like in doing that, at least in my experience, it's like you're honoring their memory in this whole other way. They live on in this really positive way. And, Molly is still changing the world. And I think that that is like the coolest feeling to have as a family member working for someone.
Absolutely. Like I said, I think love's an action, and I can feel my sister's love when, like for example, there was an Amber Alert in Western Massachusetts last year, and they were able to get the girl back after a couple hours. And I called my mom and I said, "That's because of you. All the work you did, all those phone calls, begging Ted Kennedy, talking to them about judicial oversight or whatever the contention was in that particular bill. um, you convinced them and you helped save that girl." And the work that we've done in the foundation, we've never been able to sort of give data and say we've saved this many kids or we've prevented this many abductions. We could never say that because we'll never know. We just know that we're arming the people that will listen with tools to keep their children safe, and the knowledge that the world isn't as exactly safe as we thought it was, or we hope that it is.
Yeah. I mean, and think about how much heartache you're saving those families. Even, I mean, everything, right? Tax dollars, heartache for the family, years and years of loss, like potentially keeping that family together. The ripple effect is just unreal.
Oh, absolutely. Those ripple effects break my heart when I watch, Molly's friends who struggled over the years, or, her boyfriend died about 8 years after Molly. Um, like I said, I think at 16 to lose a friend in such a manner is, sets a whole different trajectory for your life. And, again, I don't know that everyone has the tools to capture, the narrative, or empower the loss. And I think that's what we're doing. We don't feel any less, worse than the people that aren't on TV. I want to cry. In fact, I did cry in my bed the other day. um, I think that we do that and we still feel that, but we also know that we have a privilege and a responsibility, that if we don't say it, then no one else is going to. And if we don't, then we're normalizing this and we're allowing it to continue.
I love that. No, you're exactly right. And I think privilege is a great word. I think like, I've experienced where I've had friends that are like, "You're just doing this for attention." And it's like, in what world? Like, in what world would I like choose to do this for attention? It's like we're helping people, and we do have this privilege of being on something like the Paul is on show, or, having a lot of followers on social media. And it's a great responsibility that I don't think people understand that, a lot of us take really, really seriously.
Exactly. And it's not like we're getting really paid for this. Like it's not like we're making money off of Paula's on to be on her show. Like I said, it's like free work in in the idea not only to share our story, but to help everybody else who's suffering this way. Like usually when I talk about Molly, I bring up Patty Gagne, and Patty was murdered in Worcester, Massachusetts. She was strangled with her pocketbook, and nobody looked for her. She was a teenager, and she didn't maybe come from the best family. And her brother had to find her the next morning because he was the one out there looking all night for her. And nobody talks about Patty Gagne, but I'll tell you what, if familial analysis solves Patty Gagne's case, as good as solving Molly's.
What they did to your family, you're lucky to make it out alive.
Streaming on Peacock.
These men are going to come after me. Taking them out is my only chance.
Put a bullet in her head.
From the co-creator of Ozark.
Looks like a family was running drugs.
Execution-style killing, it's rare for the Keys. And it leads on who they might have been running for.
The cartel killed my family. I'm gonna kill them. All of them.
MIA. Streaming now. Only on Peacock.
Marvel Television's Wonder Man, an 8-episode series, now streaming on Disney+.
A superhero remake, not exactly what we'd expect from an Oscar-winning director.
Action! Simon Williams, audition for Wonder Man.
I'm gonna need you to sign this, assuming you don't have superpowers.
I'll never work again if anyone found out.
My lips are sealed.
Marvel Television's Wonder Man. All 8 episodes now streaming, only on Disney+.
Wow. I mean, I need to look into that. But I mean, that's honestly that I structure my podcast in such a way that I do episodes like this where I talk to the families, but then I kind of pluck these cases where I feel like there is no advocate because I think it's so important. It's not the victim's fault that they don't have someone there for them or maybe strong enough to, fight for them. So I think it's so important to shed light on cases that don't have these people at the forefront to do Paul is on or whatever it might be.
I know. I admire you so much for having the strength and the tenacity to continue this and to share stories. I think what you're doing is amazing and impactful. And I think, the way that you're sharing stories with the victim voice makes a greater impact because it not only shares the story and hopefully the true version of the story, but it also empowers the victims. And no one really gets a real chance to do that. Every time I speak about Molly and I share what happened to her and I talk about the frustrations and the difficulty with the systems in place and the work that we're doing, not doing it to, badmouth the system or call anyone particularly out. It's just that people need to recognize this. They need to be aware. Often I'll tell my friends, if something bad happens to you, make sure you call your lawyer before you call 911 because you just don't know what's going to happen these days. And, they might arrive at the scene and tell you, oh, your kid just ran away or your kid's fine or they didn't drown. You want to make sure that you have someone there advocating for you because you might not have the strength or the wherewithal or the emotional capacity to do that. I wish I had said, block the roads when Molly disappeared. I wish all the things you kind of look back and say, oh, I could have done this, I could have done that. There's probably 1,000 things I think I could have done that day, except I was standing frozen on the side of a pond, trusting the people that I thought I should trust. And that's probably been the biggest lesson in this is that you really can't trust anyone.
Yeah. I mean, you can't trust anyone to care about it as much as you or for the police to know what to do or separate them maybe having a bad day. If they come and it's the end of their shift or the beginning of their shift and they're just not into it, it's hard because, like I said, nobody's going to care as much as you. And yeah, I play that game all the time, the what if game. One initiative I want to do in Phoenix is I'm working towards creating something like an Alyssa's bill where it's really simple. When a child runs away, I would like a police officer to have to go physically to the house or wherever they live to take a report. Like, I think that could have been the difference between finding my sister and not finding my sister. And I think it's so simple.
Yep, I think that's a great bill. I'd be happy to help you with that.
Oh my gosh, I'm definitely going to take you up on that because you're doing so much. You are my hero. Like, I was like crying last night, like looking at everything that you're doing and like how cohesive your family is. And I was watching this show where that gentleman came and helped you like renovate the basement. And I was like, they deserve everything. I'm in awe.
That gentleman's sister was also murdered in Boston, Massachusetts, and that's why he helped us. He he had a big Irish family, and his sister had some mental illness, and she was murdered, and nobody looked for her. Nobody found the person who killed her. They kind of just washed it away, and he held on to that for so many years. And he's just this really gifted carpenter and woodworker, and he wanted to do something in his sister's memory, and so he actually wanted to, or is working on starting a show called Murder Matters. And the idea is that he's going to do something in memory of a victim or a victim's family, and then like show it on his show, like to support victim families, which I think is awesome. Being here with you today, I think our paths are so similar, and I admire so much of what you've done. And, I just think, we could literally raise an army together and really, all of us, if we united, we could really make some really important and, I don't know, relevant changes that would make such a difference.
I will do any project with you. Just please know that. I really will. I literally text someone and I was like, Heather Bish is like the most amazing person. I'm so excited to interview her.
Well, what's really interesting? I have friend that I don't know if you've heard of the Wetterling, Jacob Wetterling, who was murdered in 1988. Uh, his his case was solved from a podcaster, and it was like 22 years later. And they're good friends of our families. But interestingly enough, after that Paula Zahn show, they were like, "You should really get on some podcasts." But I was like, that is a great avenue. People really are interested, and you know, again, when you have all the background knowledge and you kind of put these pieces together, and let's just say you're from Warren, Massachusetts, or the area, you might know some of these players, and you might be able to connect the dots better than the investigators can because you do know the local relationships, and this one had a kid with this one, or this one was married to that one's sister, or whatever. That ties people together. So I do think there's so much value in what you're doing, and I'm looking forward to seeing this episode, and thank you again for having me today.
Yeah, of course. You're absolutely amazing. And again, I'm sorry. I know that we're like way over time. I'm just like so excited to talk to you.
No.
I I did want to get a soundbite and ask you directly because you know how things go in the media. Where is Molly's case today?
Well, it is with an investigator. Apparently, we have an unresolved case unit in Massachusetts that's been formed in the state police that's separate than. So in our cases, they're held by the district attorney in each county. So we don't like have sheriffs like in other states. So there's a separate unit in the state police. They're supposed to be working on these cases, but I've yet to find out what exactly they're doing in the 2 years that they've existed. So that's there's not much. I'm hoping with the familial DNA that we'll get some traction, but I'm dealing with an investigator that has little knowledge of my case, and it's actually frustrating to talk to him half the time. Um, so we're kind of no closer than we were from the beginning. We've had a number of suspects. We've sort of got as much as we could out of them. I think we're just in a place where we need that one piece, or we need some science.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, fair enough. And the whole aim of my podcast is not to just tell these incredibly sad stories. I want to ask my listeners to help. So what is the best way people can help you in the case?
Well, our tip line is 508-452-7575. So if anyone had information on Molly's case, I mean, again, I can't emphasize enough, even if it doesn't seem relevant, please call that number and leave a tip. We are also working on this familial DNA legislation. So, if you are a Massachusetts resident, or you know some legislators in Massachusetts, I would just urge you to reach out to them and ask them to support this legislation. It's Senate docket number 1685 currently. We haven't got the bill number yet. Everything's moving kind of slow with the COVID situation, but those are the best ways to help right now, I think.
Okay, perfect. And is there anything that you wanted to make sure made it into this episode that I did not cover or ask you?
I think I don't think so. I don't think of anything off the top of my head. Okay. I'm going to email you a book. I don't know if you saw this, but in 2006, the Wetterling family and a few other families from across the country put together a guidebook for siblings. It's not, I don't think, widely, spread out, but I would love to email you a copy of it. It was, I would say, probably the best experience of my life. We did this in 2006, and after Molly disappeared, my family was very lucky. Um, what was his name? Trying to think of his name, from California. He actually came out. His daughter was abducted in California. Blanking on his name right now. But he came out and helped my parents, and so they kind of got wrapped around by families across the country that had missing kids. And so John and I were sort of standing there like, okay, we kind of followed what our parents were doing, but after a few years, we're like, are we going to be okay? Like, we watched that movie. I Know My First Name is Steven. I don't know if you ever saw that, but that was a very sad case, and that's all we had to draw from. We had no nothing to, there was no, you couldn't Google anything. There was nothing in place. And so I kept asking my mom, well, what are the other parents' kids like? Are they okay? And so they finally were like, all right, let's bring these kids together. And we weren't kids, we were all in our probably 20s or 30s. But we ended up starting to meet. We started in DC, and then we went to a couple different other places. But we put together this book, sort of a guidebook for siblings. And after we finished that, they ended up recording, just like a video. And I thought it was really good because it kind of um, speaks to all those things that you don't really talk about, and you can't really talk about with other people. Like, how do I deal with the media? How do I lose my own self? Now I'm Molly Bish's sister. Like, how do you deal with all these things? And it was really just one of the best healing experiences for my brother and I, because we were able to meet with siblings and be like, yeah, like, my mom has not been the same since, or we don't have Christmas this way anymore. Or my mom keeps buying me presents from my sister for my birthday. Like, those awkward things that you can't tell your parents or other people. So it was really an incredible healing experience. And they had this book out there, and again, I don't think it's widely spread, but I'd love to share it with you.
Yeah, I would love that. And if you need help spreading it, I think that that is amazing, honestly.
The saddest part of that story was Jimmy Rice's sister was in that group, and Jimmy Rice was from Florida, and he was 9 years old when he was abducted from his bus stop. And his sister ended up committing suicide in 2012, I think it was. So, we did this book in 2006, and we kind of felt like, okay, we have each other. I can stand in my backyard and know that if I feel really screwed up and screwed over by the police, or disappointed by my family, or what have you, that's unique to our situation, I could kind of know that there's someone else in the world that understood this. Um, and I thought we were kind of safe, that we had each other now, that maybe we'd be okay. And so it was really devastating when Martha took her life, and um, she wasn't a part of our group anymore. And it sort of made me understand that this is sort of a lifelong journey, and we're never really going to be okay.
Yeah. I mean, there is no okay. And I think it's, realizing that you have to kind of live with that and deal with it. And I don't know, it's a forever journey of healing, and there is no end. And I don't mean it like in a toxic way. I just don't, when there's no resolution, even after there is, there's just no way to wrap your head around why something so tragic would happen to somebody, especially when they're so young. There's no closure from that because it will never make sense.
Absolutely. I knew a family from Texas who actually got to go to the execution of the person that killed their daughter, and they said that they walked out of there and that nothing had changed for them. Absolutely nothing. Nothing made them feel better. It didn't make them feel worse. It just was nothing. And that's why I think it's important for all of us to sort of be in that club that nobody wants to belong to and support each other. And the work that you're doing is so important, bringing people's voices forward and telling their stories and sharing their experiences, because I think about the next person who has to travel this road, and I would rather than be able to Google and find me or you and be able to talk to us and for us to be able to help them. I would never want someone to travel that road alone like my brother and I had to.
Exactly. And with social media now, I feel like it's more accessible than ever.
Absolutely. Definitely. And we've at least made some strides in that area.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. You are so amazing. Okay, I'm going to stop recording. If you could just hang on the line. If you've made it this far, I really want to say thank you. Again, I know that not everyone wants to know how things operate behind the scenes. I know that some people will forever see true crime as merely entertainment without another thought. That's something I don't think anyone can change. But I want to thank you for going above and beyond to hear us out and for caring. You, yes, you who's listening right now, give me hope that the industry will continue to become a better space for victims and families. You give me hope that true crime won't be seen as a sick obsession, but as a wonderful community of people who truly just want to help. But as always, thank you, I love you, and I'll talk to you next time. Voices for Justice is hosted and produced by me, Sarah Turney. For more information about the podcast, to suggest a case, to see resources used for this episode, and to find out more about how to help the cases I discuss, visit voicesforjusticepodcast.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to rate and review the show in your podcast player. It really does help more people find the podcast and these cases in need of justice.